Hi, and welcome to another podcast from Steve Hewitt Ministries. I'm Steve Hewitt, and I'm delighted if you're watching this. I've been learning how to use this program step by step. This is only the third podcast we've done. The second one, I learned how to put text in there, so you should see my name on the screen. And in this one, we're going to go all the way and actually have a guest join us. And the first person I could think to join my podcast was Nicholaou. Nick and I have been together, known each other for, I don't know, way back in the early days of Christian Computing Magazine, early 90s. He wrote for me through all the years of the magazine until I sold it. And we've continued to be good friends. When I wrote the book manuscript out, I wanted a couple of friends to take a look at it, and Nick's one of the first ones I sent it to. And he was so supportive in getting back and saying that he loved the book, and there's 5 principles, and he had a way of printing those out and putting them onto a thing card that he could then stick on his mirror. And that was really encouragement to me. First of all, let me give you the information about the book. If you'd like to get a copy, either in paperback or electronic version, paperback's $13.99, the electronic version is $3.99, and you go to www.tinyurl.com/Steve Hewitt Ministries, and you'll see how you can purchase the book. Okay, I'm going to bring Nick in. I've asked him to share his testimony, and there he is, my friend Nick Nicholaou. How you doing,
Hello.
Nick?
Good. How about you?
Hi, Nick. I'm really glad you're joining me. I thank you very much for, first of all, your comments about the book, and second of all, for being my first victim on inviting guests onto the podcast. This is not going to be the only podcast that we're going to do unless it turns out really bad. Nick's going to join me for 2 others where we'll talk more things, where we will talk more about things in the book. But on this very first visit, I wanted Nick to basically share his testimony. So, Nick, take it away.
Well, thanks, Steve, for the privilege of getting to be your first guest and for the privilege of sharing my testimony. God gives us each a testimony, and mine's different than everybody's, just like everybody's is different from each other's. I started out in a very rough childhood. I was the kid who was always in trouble, always getting expelled from schools. In junior high, I started drinking a lot and doing drugs. And in fact, I had a bar in my room and put a lock on my door so that my parents might not find it. I dropped out in the 10th grade. Basically, I'm saying I was the bad kid in the neighborhood you would never want your kid to hang out with. Then I realized when I was high school age that I could get drugs for free if I dealt them. So I started dealing drugs, and that was probably about 1969 or so. And by 1974, in the San Fernando Valley where I lived, which was about 1 million people, I was a very large volume wholesaler. I sold to wholesalers, so I was kind of up the ladder quite a bit, never selling to users. High-grade pot, psychedelics, that kind of stuff. But then, when I was 21, one of the guys apparently who I dealt to must have broken into my apartment and accessed my private stash of high-grade stuff that I would never sell. It was just for personal use. And then that happened again. And so right about that time, I heard a quote that was attributed later to C.S. Lewis saying that the man who could count one friend on his hand who would die for him is a very wealthy man. And so I thought, well, a lot of times we're the person that our friends expect us to be. And so maybe I'm the person I am because of the people I'm hanging out with. So I decided I'll go on an adventure, a cross-country hitchhike, meeting all sorts of people, and try and get a sense of who my soul best aligns with. And so I set off, and I was only about 4 weeks before it came to an end. But during that 4 weeks, almost everybody who picked me up turned out to be a Christian. And they would share a verse with me, and I could tell that there was something different in their life. I even would say, it seems like you're almost surrounded by peace. Why is that? And the response would be, well, I'm a Christian. And so this went on for 3 or 4 weeks. And then I ended up in Arizona where I was going to visit some friends and family and decided to hitchhike to a bar where I might be able to find some company for the evening. And dropped off from the bar about 2 blocks away at a park. In the park, there was a sign that said free movie in the park tonight. And I've always been the kind of person that says, well, if it's free, you're probably overpaying for it. But I thought, I'm on this journey. I should check it out. So I walked into the park and there was a little platform set up, a guy in a wheelchair and about 5 guys behind him. And the guy in the wheelchair had a mic and he said, I know there's somebody else out there who wants to receive Jesus as his Lord. And I thought, man, there's no way I'm going up there. I'm from Southern California. And the Jesus freaks, the Jesus movement, we call them the Jesus freaks, was a strong movement out here. And you couldn't walk down Sunset Strip without being surrounded by maybe 15 or 20 of them. And I'm half Jewish, so I would say, I'm Jewish, leave me alone. And then there'd always be somebody who'd say, well, I'm Jewish too. So there was just no getting away from those guys. There was no way I was going forward. So I stood in the back of the park, and I prayed when they prayed. I just held my hands open, and I said, God, for the last few weeks I've been hearing promises about you, and I'll do the research. I'll figure out which ones you actually made. And to the extent you're faithful, you can have my life. I don't know if you remember, Steve, the old Lifebuoy soap commercials. Guy would take a shower in the morning getting ready for work, and when he would walk out of the house, he would be about 3 feet off the ground.
I do remember, yeah.
That's immediately how I felt. And then I got this bad flavor in my mouth, and I thought, I got to get something to take that away. And little did I know, this is just God working on me. And so I thought there's probably a 7-Eleven or something like that down by where the bar is. But I don't want to go in the bar because I don't want to lose this awesome feeling that I've got going. So I walked down by the bar, and across the street from it was a coffee bar that was run by a church, and a huge banner over the bar that said, Jesus is Lord. And I thought, man, there's no way I'm going in there. So as I'm walking past the bar, the first step that would have been past the corner of the building, it felt like a strong wind came up, and if I would have kept my forward momentum, my hat would have blown off. And so I said, okay, I'll go in the bar. In the coffee bar. And so I went in, and a guy asked me what I wanted, and I said a glass of water would be great. And again, my perspective, because of the Jesus movement, I didn't want to say anything, but I knew I kind of had to. So I sort of mumbled into my hand, I became a Christian tonight. And from 5 feet away, he turned around and he said, what did you say?
Awesome.
Now I was on the hook. So I told him, and then another guy came over and said, well, you got to get in the Word, brother. And he gave me a Bible and said, start reading. So I sat down at the table and I started reading. But I was struggling because you know what the beginning of Genesis is like.
Yeah.
And for a non-believer or a new believer trying to read that, it was a struggle. Another guy came over and he said, hey, I heard you became a Christian tonight. And I said, yeah. And he said, I noticed you're reading the Bible. What are you reading? And I told him. And he said, well, the Bible is an interesting book. You don't have to start at the beginning cover and go to the end cover. It's a collection of books. And what he suggested was that I read starting in John. And he said in the translation I had, which was King James, he said, that's a tough translation. Let me give you my Bible. It's a living Bible, and which is a paraphrase. And so I read John, I read Acts, and I went back to where I was staying that night. Halfway through Romans, I said, man, I got to get some sleep. But God just gave me a huge thirst for the Word. And coincidentally, of course, there's no coincidence in God's economy. Coincidentally, the same time that happened, 4 guys moved into an apartment down the hall from mine that go to a great church. And my wife, Grace, who lived in New York, decided to transplant to California. So God had all sorts of stuff going on. I met these guys in the apartment building hallway. They invited me to church. It was a great church. I got really good doctrinal grounding there, and it's just amazing what God has done, not just in me, but even through me.
That's fantastic. Now, you said your wife, that was going to be your future wife, right?
My future wife, yeah, we didn't get married. That was when I was 21, and we didn't get married till I was 30.
Wow. Wow. And Nick, now I'll testify about you. You're a dynamic, mature Christian. You've written books. You've served the Lord all of your life, basically. All right. Well, Nick, that's a fantastic testimony. You know, I teach people in classes how to give your testimony in 1 minute so that you can share it on an elevator ride or something like that. And Nick wanted to know if I wanted the 1 minute version or the longer version. I'm glad we gave him the longer version. I've heard some of that in your past, Nick, but I don't think I've ever heard you put that all together for the first time, and that's truly amazing. Okay, you gave me a lot of compliments about the book. I'm always a little embarrassed to actually have you talk about it now. But can you tell me or tell other people what you liked about the book? I try to advertise it as something that I've not read in any of the book, the 5 principles combined. So tell me anything about the book that impressed you.
Well, I would agree. I don't think I've read it put together the way you did. Those 5 principles I thought were just terrific. And as I read through them, what I decided was, or what I noticed was, that's really what I do. So it was a wonderful encouragement to me. I do it a little differently than God's called you to do it, but that's okay. The principles were what counted. Like you said, love each and every person. Huge.
Yeah.
That's the beginning point.
That's the main point. In fact, people have a hard time with that, though. Okay, so many times people say, well, if you love me, keep my commandments. Jesus says that, and so they immediately launch into, okay, well, that includes the Bible says no tattoos, and you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and they grab many of the Old Testament laws, but the basic commandment, when it says, if you love me, keep my commandments, was to love other people. And not just our friends, not just our family, not just our neighbors, which for many people, that alone is a challenge right there, but even our enemies and strangers. And so I try to live that every day, and I hope this book will encourage other people to do the same.
I do too. And we have always had as a value at the Nicholaou house, both my wife Grace and I, to love our neighbors.
Yeah. Okay, so the next podcast we're going to do at least 3, Nick. Let's work on because we already talked about some of this today about asking God simply to use us. What does that look like? I think a lot of people think it looks like, I won someone to the Lord today. I read them a Romans road track, and therefore they're now a Christian, so God used me. A lot of people don't have that privilege. It's a wonderful thing if it happens. But there's so many, many, many other ways God can use you. In fact, the next podcast I already shared with Nick, I'm going to share with you, my wife, how God is using her at her work. And I've never heard anybody else, God gave him that opportunity. So that'll be the next podcast. Nick, you will be back with us? Didn't scare you off?
Glad to.
All right,
so much.
super. We'll see how this looks. Maybe this won't be the first one after all. All right, take care. God bless.